little bit of background on sort of my story and what we're up to. So Pavilion is building a marketplace for state and local public purchasing, which is a $2 trillion a year industry that largely relies on technology from the 90s. So there's a huge opportunity, I think, to improve the experience of the folks in the public sector who are looking to make purchases on behalf of our communities and really still relying on pretty old school tech, emails, phone calls, kind of one-off visits to websites. And the way I came into starting Pavilion was from my own experience, actually. So I had come from a background in philanthropy and technology, and then I made a hard shift into government because I wanted to do something that had a bigger social impact. And while working for the city and county of San Francisco, I basically saw an opportunity to change not just how the city and county of San Francisco make the folks at the city and county make purchases, but actually, all state and local governments across the United States. And felt like, oh man, if I could be part of just making the procurement process, the purchasing process work a little bit better, that would be a really awesome, way to spend my time on the planet in terms of positive upside, both in terms of building a really large company and the financial upside, but also, and more importantly for me personally, the opportunity to actually impact human lives at scale.
Awesome. So what was the time in your life that you decided this is the time to build, this is the time I want to launch? What was that defining moment for you?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I left government having this instinct around working in the public procurement space. As I mentioned, folks like me working in the public sector are deploying $2 trillion collectively across the country every single year of public funds. And yet the way that we spend that money is so disconnected from our experience as private consumers, right? We can pull up on our phones and order groceries, hire a babysitter, call a car. And yet, when public servants are sitting in government offices and trying to deploy millions or tens of millions or more in public funds, they're literally calling and emailing each other to figure out how to do that. So I had this experience where I was like, man, there's a vision of how that behavior should work. This sense of public sector work is so important. It definitely deserves better tools. And I kind of bit into that and this vision of what the world would look like, and especially government services would look and feel like for those who depend on them. And then it was kind of this confusing time of how do I actually be a part of bringing that future into being? And so I would say I spent probably over a year kind of understanding a lot more about the landscape, understanding who was already working on different aspects of the problem. And once I had identified that there was actually this gap in the industry, which is hey, there's a lot of technology going into helping people create new contracts, onboard new vendors. But there was this big gap around what do we do with the work that's already been done? How do we help public servants share? And as an alternative to creating a new contract from scratch, how do we help governments actually leverage the work that's already been done and exists out there by other public entities? So once I learned about that, it was really exciting. And I was like, okay, cool, I can zoom in on this particular area. But I still wasn't sure what the best mechanism for impact would be. So I looked at is the place to actually build this within government? I'd come from obviously working in the public sector, and I've experienced the kind of power of scale that government can have. But I was pretty convinced that in order to build a technology solution and recruit very quickly the kinds of people, technical talent in particular, that I needed to work with, I needed to start a company. I also saw this opportunity, and again, it's kind of a gap of public sector entities really benefit when they're able to collaborate, but no one entity is really incentivized to create the technical infrastructure to be able to work with other governments. And my experience coming from within the city and county of San Francisco had been it's awesome to get other governments to work together, but for long-term sustainability of those kinds of programs, most often they need to spin out and kind of take on a life of their own. So I think after surveying the landscape and kind of identifying this gap, seeing that no one was kind of filling that need, and then also having the conviction that okay, this is a technical solution, and in order to achieve the kind of scale at the kind of speed that I was hoping, that we need to do it outside of government and in a venture-backed way. I think the third piece was just like the market is so huge. I think in my own experience and working across like philanthropic endeavors and in government, there are plenty of really interesting social impact opportunities that just don't have a market opportunity. They're just, at a high level, it's really hard to make money from people who don't have a lot of money. But in this case, this is a really unique intersection, public procurement, of like really massive amount of commercial activity that happens every single year, and social impact upside. And so I just got really excited about like, how do we go after that opportunity really quickly in a tech enabled and kind of tech first way, and achieve the kind of scale that I think is actually possible, looking at the market size. And so that kind of pointed to like, okay, venture backed technology company, and set me on a course.
And I understand that you started your company, or while you were starting your company, COVID hit. So that was obviously a big roadblock within your journey. And when in a time when a lot of people were slowing down or maybe stopping their operations, you were actually doubling down. What was that experience like, and how might have that affected what you thought a founder experience might have been like?
Yeah, I still remember. So the day that our first two engineers were going to start, we actually like started to work remotely. We were all ready to like be in office, and I remember like the weekend before we made the call to start working from home that week, thinking, oh, it'll just be like temporary, like many of us, like, oh, maybe a couple weeks, and then we'll be back. And I remember like piling monitors into like my car and a couple bags of like homemade cookies to like welcome the engineers, and just be like, okay, sorry, this is like a little chaotic, but like welcome, and so excited that you're here. And then of course, like fast forward a year plus, 2 years later, we had continued to grow throughout the pandemic. I also became a parent during that time, so there was just a lot going on all at once. But it was also this time of like incredible learning, and I think like resilience, both like in terms of looking at the team and how everyone was just kind of like managing to stay excited and energized at a time that like, again, felt kind of existentially pretty scary for a lot of us. I think one benefit we had was like staying really grounded in the impact that we were able to deliver, and feeling like our work was really connected to COVID response. At the time, we were helping state and a ton of local governments respond and navigate like the sort of wild west of buying PPE and really serving their communities in kind of a new and unprecedented time. And I think that I think was actually like mentally really helpful, just to have some way of feeling like, oh, we're actually participating and helping. And as the business is growing and kind of other aspects of life feel chaotic, there's actually really significant meaning, and we can understand how the work that we're doing and how we're signing on every day is corresponding to like being connected to something that's bigger than just ourselves. It's funny, actually, we kind of kept a pulse throughout the pandemic on whether or not folks wanted to come back into the office. I think my co-founder and I really like being able to meet in person, and I think our team overall is really collaborative, and so we've enjoyed getting to spend time in person. And even towards the sort of end of the pandemic, when folks were starting to come back together, the team was really excited to have a physical office space, to have a hybrid work environment. So we continue to do that today. We have over 30 members in the team, and we're typically in office downtown, 2 or 3 days a week. And that's actually been a really nice balance of getting to see people and work super collaboratively, brainstorm, kind of exchange, ideas and get to know each other better as people, but then have the like dedicated kind of work times and space and flexibility and schedule. I know I certainly appreciate that now also as a parent.
Yeah, definitely that flexibility of the hybrid workforce, being able to work from home some days and then work from the office to collaborate with other days. I think it's really resonated with a lot of people. In those early days when you were pivoting and doing everything all at once and having to navigate the COVID situation, how might have that affected how you were proving your product to the market in a time when maybe some people might not have been listening?
Yeah. So I think in some ways, like it's been really helpful. Like COVID overall for the public procurement industry really cast a light on the importance of procurement, right? All of a sudden, procurement was really in the spotlight of like, how are we getting a hold of the equipment that we need to keep our communities safe, and was, I think, more and more seen as a strategic function within government. I think there's been this sort of challenge of procurement to really be seen as and take on a role that's more than just like a back office compliance function, but actually a really important like strategic seat at the table, right? Like what we're buying, who we're buying from, the quality of the products, the reputation of the suppliers that we're working with, all of that like really came into the spotlight. And it was, kind of part of this bigger set of macro trends that are really providing like tailwinds for our industry at the moment. I remember one of the things like our team really benefited from during COVID was all of a sudden government entities and public servants were online in a new and exciting way. And previously this group of users had been like pretty hard to reach, right? Like you had to show up in person, make an appointment, look over someone's shoulder to actually see them using a product or understand their workflow. And all of a sudden, I think with increased adoption of technology in this moment of crisis, and with like remote work, the rise of remote work, it became a lot easier to just connect with folks and get really quick feedback on the problems they were working on and how we could support. So that was positive. And then a huge inundation of federal money. And that continues in terms of like, how are we looking at infrastructure more recently, CARES funding kind of in response to COVID as well. And so those are tailwinds that, again, like as much as COVID was really stressful, I think really brought the role of procurement and also some of the changes that are at the forefront of the industry where, our business like also fits in to the forefront.
So you raised your Series A about a year ago. Now, if you can reflect back to those early days, how has your role as a founder evolved from kind of you and your co-founder to now with a larger team?
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I remember when I was going through the program, Bob Tinker came and was talking to us about the journey of being a founder and a CEO. And I remember him sharing this kind of mental model of, like in the very beginning, you're kind of wandering in the woods. Then you kind of have this like Braveheart sense where, like you as a leader, like in the front, your troops are kind of behind, but you're all fighting the battles together. And then eventually as you get like really, really big, it's more like the CEO in the war room, you're there with your like generals, but you're kind of far from the battle. While like the transition has not been that extreme, I definitely have been grateful. I mean, it's actually one of the most fun things about founding a company and being a first-time founder is like, man, that learning curve is so steep, and the needs of the business and the demands really on you as CEO, at least that I've found, change like pretty consistently. And being able to like respond, learn really quickly, and also like acknowledge when you're like, yeah, I made a mistake there and I'm learning from it, or I have learned from it and here's what I'm doing kind of in response, has been so valuable. So I would say it's definitely been a big shift. Early days when it was just a handful of folks figuring out how I spend my time, I was more in the weeds on any individual project. And communication, I would say, mattered less. You could all kind of sit around a table or fit on one Zoom screen. And it was just easier to kind of have everyone know what was happening and the why behind what was happening. And I think one of the big transitions has been increasingly spending my time like hiring people who are just better than me at a whole bunch of things. And so that's been really fun and great to get to like build out a team where there's really sophisticated like knowledge of and like super competent people in those different disciplines, and getting to kind of like set them loose on the problem has been awesome. And then I would say like the time and effort that I spend on really thinking through like the strategy and the communication of the why, and where we're going as a business and how all of these different work streams fit together to kind of create that structure so everyone can understand and focus on the problems that they're solving, but also feel like, okay, I get how the work that I'm doing fits into this kind of like puzzle piece of, or like puzzle of how we get to the next phase as a business, and ultimately how we achieve our vision of like, hey, enabling like positive impact for hundreds of millions of Americans by making government procurement work better. So I spend a lot more time on communicating like the why, the strategy, making sure the strategic direction like makes sense, and have enjoyed when my team like kind of kicks the tires on that. And it's forced me to be a lot better at that.
Is there something that sticks out in your mind as the most rewarding part of your entire journey?
Oh man. I mean, I feel like I talked to someone the other day and they're like, you seem like you're doing a lot. Like, aren't you just really tired? And I was like, actually, no, because I'm so energized by the work that we're doing and really just like that transition of early days, like it feels so impossible and you feel so crazy. And you're sort of like begging people to believe you. And you find a few people that are like, okay, like this sounds crazy, but I'm interested. And that feels great. Like when you're not the only person who can kind of see this vision of the future. And now it's just like this moment of, it's funny. I actually think about parenting too, where it's like, it's the fun phase. Like this part is really fun. Where, you know, there are, like there's traction, it's starting to happen. And you're like really positioned to succeed. Of course, there's a ton to figure out, but it just feels way more existentially like secure. Like, hey, there's a place for this. There's a need for this in the world. And, you know, like we've made it to the first kind of milestone or like base camp and, you know, looking up, there's still a really long way to go. But it's just such a change in like, I guess, feeling less crazy and seeing a line of sight that's actually pretty clear around how that vision that you had that felt kind of insane, maybe even to you a little bit at the very beginning, is actually more and more inevitable. And others can see that too. And so that I think is just incredibly energizing. The other piece for me is just, it's been my dream to combine like very large scale sort of like opportunities and social impact with, you know, getting to build at the speed of technology and in that sort of startup environment. And so getting to like combine the best of both of those worlds in this venture has just been incredibly rewarding and exciting.
And is there a piece of advice that you would give to first-time founders or prospective founders in their early days? Or maybe a piece of advice that you wish you would have heard?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple that come to mind. One is I think just you know, it's hard. It's really hard. And so I think falling in love with a vision of how you want the world to be was really helpful for me. So yeah, I think falling in love with that problem and seeing a way to solve that problem and being just obsessed with that problem helped me get through, I think, the like mountains of rejection and naysaying that will happen and build a thicker skin. I think learning to trust yourself, like one of the things I've loved in partnering with our Series A investors at Forerunner is like, they love to invest in folks that are experts in a particular consumer. And so while at first, like something in GovTech and, you know, like working with Forerunner felt kind of strange, like it didn't feel like a natural pairing, the more time we spent together was like, oh, wait, like you are so expert in this customer segment. Like, you know, you've lived and you know, and you work with all the time, these public procurement professionals who are making these buying decisions. And that's a really underserved customer segment. So I think a lesson for me is like, believe also in the knowledge and the expertise that you have developed. And in fact, I think it can be really easy early on to get intimidated by like, I don't know, like this is what a venture capitalist says, and this is some investor feedback, and oh gosh, like, are they right? And you know, don't discard that. There's definitely lessons to be learned there, but I think trusting in like what you have learned and your expertise as a domain expert and someone that's like really lived and breathed the problem, that took a while for me. And now I'm like, hell yeah, like we are expert in this space, and we should own that a bit more. And then I think the final thing, and this one is probably again, it's something I'd heard but not really understood, is like the people matter so much. So being really choosy about who you work with, and intentional about the kind of culture that you want to build. I think there are definitely those times in company building where you're just like, I just need someone to do this. Like, please, please, please help. But every person you hire has an outsized effect on what it is like to show up on your team every single day, and the future people that you'll be working with, and the overall kind of personality and values of the organization. So being really intentional about that, and thoughtful, even in the midst of all the craziness, and when it feels like, oh, is this really a good use of time? Like, yes, 100%. It's a great use of time. And I would say I spend probably like, I don't know, half of my time now these days on like people related stuff. And it's not a bad use of time.